to the Balancing Act podcast. As you know, I'm Andy Tempe. Today, we've got the former president of Western Technical College and current executive director of Leader Ethics Wisconsin. This is Lee Rasch joining us, and he's also a fellow musician. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Andy.
So today, we're going to explore the concept of ethics in business. And, Lee has a really solid career here and has gone on and is really deeply involved in ethics from a political perspective. And I really can't think of anyone more capable than Lee to help us think this through. But before we get started, it'd be great if you told our listeners your story. And with all of my guests, I ask that you pick one event in your life that was just a real key accelerant for your career. So over to you.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I retired from Western Technical College, almost 5 years ago now. And I worked there as president for 28 years. Prior to that, I was a senior vice president at a large community college in the Chicago area. I had a small business. I actually worked in the Illinois correction system for about 8 years. But if I were going to identify one thing that really stood out for me that had an influence, it was really very early on in my career when I was working in corrections at a juvenile facility for young offenders. And I had a chance to work for a superintendent who was an outstanding role model for ethical leadership for me. She was very capable and astute at bringing out solutions. People would come to her with problems, and she would help them bring out their own solutions. She was a very good listener, and she had an excellent way of showing how to be effective as a role model in working in the field that you're working in. That experience was really important for me at the beginning because all throughout my career, sometimes I worked with outstanding leaders and sometimes leaders who weren't so outstanding. And I really use that as a way of keeping my thinking grounded and to shoot for that kind of role modeling if it was any way possible.
Yeah, it's as I interview more people, it's amazing, but really not unexpected that there's that that one person, that one kind of tipping point in your career that kind of sets you off on the path. So that's really cool, Lee. I'd like our listeners to learn more about what Leader Ethics Wisconsin is really all about. Can you clue us in on the mission there?
Let me give you a personal story initially. When I retired from Western, I was committed not to just jump into everything that comes along. And I spent a good 6 months having coffee and a conversation with respected community leaders, people that I knew and respected their judgments and their opinions. And a lot of the discussion kept going back to concerns about our democracy, our style of leadership, and what the impact that was having on so many other fields. So a little over 4 years ago, we formed a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization called Leader Ethics Wisconsin. Its mission is to promote ethical leadership among elected officials. And in our definition, we really focus on 4 principles. We feel that elected officials, ethical leaders, should be truthful, transparent with public information. They should be unifiers rather than dividers. And to the best of their ability, they should work to represent their entire constituency, not just the simple majority that may vote for them. Now, in many ways, people say, well, that sounds like the kind of things any ethical leader in any setting should be displaying. And that's the truth. The interesting thing is, for many reasons, we are feeling that politics is different, and we shouldn't have the same expectations for leadership that we do in any other field. And our role as an organization is to try to help dispel that perception and to get people thinking about what we can accomplish in our democracy if we really do have ethical leaders among our elected officials.
Is leader ethics Wisconsin? Is leader ethics something that is a franchise that you that you glommed onto, or is this something fresh and new just for Wisconsin that you might want to take outside of Wisconsin?
Well, we did do some research to see if there are other similar organizations and efforts going on around the country. Actually, there's a lot of good things happening that are focusing on a better democracy, good practices, policy improvements, but there really wasn't anything focusing on ethical leadership. And so as a result of that, we launched this organization recognizing that we were going to focus on a niche, but it's not the whole picture. We've got to focus on supporting other aspects of good government and a healthy democracy as well. So when we launched this, we were really one of a kind. Now, it's good to see that there are even more complementary organizations that are developing in Wisconsin, but in other places around the country too. And in our opinion, the challenges we're trying to take on, they're too big for any one project to address. We really need to find ways to collaboratively partner with other organizations and try to work together and have a better chance of accomplishing the change we're seeking.
Well, I'm excited to see how the concept maybe can grow outside and the influence that you have. So let's I'm an outsider to the political arena. I don't want to run for office. I spent a long time in a business leadership role, but from this outsider's point of view, it looks like trust in politicians is at or near all-time lows. And, that facts and truth are just easily twisted into false narratives that to score political points, which, and that's one of the reasons why I stay out of politics, because I can't imagine how my personal North Star would align with kind of what you have to do in the political arena. So while trust in political leaders has historically been a challenge, what from your vantage point makes today any different? Is today really any different?
Well, if you look at the long term in our country's history, we've had some significant peaks and valleys. We were a divided country, and we had a civil war in the mid 19th century, and the Vietnam War area. At that time, we were very divided too. But what we're experiencing now is different, and it's very concerning because it's not focusing as much on policy differences. It's based on differences, political differences, even personal differences that are being exploited by. In some cases, it's related to social media. It's certainly related to the style of political leaders and the political think tanks. But there's also some unsavory actors that are behind creating this divide as well. And so it's a significant concern. But what's going on with that divide is also a corresponding breakdown in trust in major institutions, not just political institutions. Education, healthcare, business, basically media, just about any viable major institution in this country is being affected by this growing political divide. And so it's really important that we realize this dynamic and start to take some of the steps, starting at the local level, to try to counter that and build resilience to that to the best of our ability.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's transition from politics to businesses and institutions. You led a large educational institution that was kind of sandwiched in the middle. You and I have. I was sandwiched in the middle from a business perspective, leading a large organization within even larger organization. you did the same for 28 years at Western, with the Wisconsin state system kind of sitting over the top of what you were doing at Western. In early February, I posted a muse on the andrewtemte.com website entitled "My Word is My Bond," and the primary premise there was to prevent the severe mistreatment of facts that's occurring in the political sphere from leaking into businesses. I'd really like to hear your recommendations for both business and institutional leaders who are concerned about the degradation of moral and ethical compasses within their ranks, and what that does to trust inside organizations.
Well, it's really a profound question, and it's really, I think, the biggest challenge we may have in this next decade as business and institutional leaders. This divide is affecting the way people are trusting information on healthcare, on education. If you're in the airline industry, we've never seen the kind of frustration and hostility that is happening on airplanes and in airports. It's affecting many, many organizations. And unfortunately, much of the information that's driving that, it's false information. It's misinformation. In fact, it is even disinformation. It's designed to try to build a divide. So the challenge is, what do we do as leaders? I think that you raised some really important points about the strategies. Any strategy that you can embrace to try to build trust and confidence within the institution is the best place to start. There are things you really have a limited impact or ability to impact outside of the institution, but you could really make a difference if you work from the inside. I do think we need to think about this as a team building challenge. The conflict that happens when you have disinformation driving a divide with your employees or your customers, we need to think of that as a team building challenge. And so there are things we can do to try to counter that really are the things that we would do if other things were driving a divide internally. And so we shouldn't try to reinvent something, but we should basically try to customize and focus on some of the dynamics. For example, I think you could use an element of media literacy as part of a team building exercise so that people could be better able to recognize disinformation and misinformation and better judge those sources so that you would likely minimize some of that divisiveness that might incur internally. But I do think there is another aspect of this, and it comes down to the role of leadership. And you brought up the point about the role of a leader as a role model. The leader really needs to walk the talk. And so nothing can be more, I think, compelling and influencing within an organization if you're trying to build trust is if they believe and see the leader exemplifying that. Maybe the only challenge, the added challenge you have right now is that leader also has to recognize that there could be things happening outside of the company or organization that also need to be addressed. And so it's an added challenge when you see trust being reduced in your industry and the impact that that's having on your ability within your industry to succeed. And so there may be times when those leaders need to speak out. And even though it may not be the most comfortable situation, speak out so that they can be weighing in on these important things that could be affecting not just their company or organization, but all the others in the industry as well. And so that the industry can start to band together and build some counterweight to try to build resilience to these factors.
Yeah, I like to we talk about political divides and us as community members not seeing eye to eye. There's this concept of me has just gotten out, in my opinion, out of control. Things are much more about me than it is about us, and the word freedom seems to be just thrown around very, very loosely that I should be able to be free to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And that's not what this country was founded on. I like to take folks back to the concept of liberty, which is freedom balanced with a community responsibility. I just wanted to use this moment in this episode to make a plug for, hey, do a little research and learn what liberty is and how it differs from freedom, because that word liberty really helps balance, and it's the name of the podcast, balance the concept of freedom with your responsibility to your community and your fellow community members that look like you and that don't look like you. I just needed to step on my soapbox there for just a second. Segueing on, we're both lifelong educators, and that's one thing I really appreciate about you in your previous remarks about what business leaders can do. Another one is to really take their role as an educator very seriously. Not only what are the skills that we need to do right now today to get the job done, but the human skills that we need to work better together. And ethics education is an important but not a very sexy line of inquiry. Ethics doesn't get as much attention as it needs in business, in my opinion. Most ethics training in business is, check the box. Hey, everybody's got to take this same course, and it's boring as heck. What are your specific recommendations for secular programs or courses that you might recommend to leaders or individual contributors if they'd like to learn more about ethics and its application, practical application in the business community?
Well, this is really an important question because, unfortunately, when you hear the term ethics or it's being covered in an institutional setting, frequently it's you must follow the rules, you can't steal, you can't do things that are considered criminal or otherwise unethical. And unfortunately, it's overlooking some of the most important things, and that is the role of a leader as an effective role model. And we need to really recognize that it's so important. The things that we do influence the lives of others. And we have a responsibility that comes with that. And so, how can we be better able to think and reflect on that role so that it can have a better possible impact in our actions and the lives of others? So I think for me, I like to gravitate back to the concepts of servant leadership and what that does to try to ask us that key question: what can I do to better serve the people in my organization, the customers, serve the world? And that constant internal reflection, I think, helps leaders to recognize that ethical leadership is very much tied to that key question. I do think there's other sources of information on ethical leadership in business that are important. I've been studying our history and trying to find examples of ethical dilemmas that we've had in the past, and how did our country work through them, and what did we learn from that? And one of the books that I would recommend would be The Politics Industry. It's written by Catherine Gale and Michael Porter. Porter is with the Harvard Business School. And they talk about the dilemma of
Michael.
That's right. I don't know. It's a great resource. But the thing is, they talk about the dilemma of today's politics, but then they go back and they talk about the politics in the mid to late teen parts of the 19th century. And things were pretty bad right then at that time. And, to become a candidate for a senator or Congress, you really just, you knew somebody, you paid off somebody. It led to the progressive era, and it led to a lot of change, legislative change to try to counter that. We have primary elections today because of the changes that happened back then. But here's what Porter and Gale pointed out. Um, we have lost a lot of that integrity over the last century. And what we need to do is recognize that ethical practices, they aren't on autopilot. They need to be constantly reviewed and tuned up so that you can maintain those things. And so I think there's an important lesson there that, it's tough to get laws through, but when you put all that work in and we let it just gradually drift away, what a tragedy that is. The same is true in our organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for, as a finance guy, Michael Porter, and, he's the guy with the five forces, the five industry forces. That's what, that's the Mike. I'll have to see if it's the same Michael Porter. I'm pretty sure it is. So, Lee, as we draw our time to a close, I ask most of my guests this, but I think you're particularly an interesting person to ask. What's one sage piece of advice you would give to an individual contributor? Somebody coming right into their first job in business, their first job in an institution. What do you say to that individual to help them get a head start?
Well, the world's complicated, business is complicated, but I do think someone who's just starting out can best gain and learn from the experience of someone who is willing to be a mentor. And, people are good leaders, typically good leaders welcome that opportunity to be a mentor. Even when they're busy, they can carve out 30 minutes over a cup of coffee and have a conversation about their thoughts and their experiences. Ethical leaders, good leaders, started out in the same place, and they were probably making mistakes and doing wrong things back then. And so they can really relate to how they have grown and changed. When I hear about people who are in a leadership challenge, the best people know that they are still learning. And so when a young person is getting exposed to that, I think that's the best thing they can know. That get on that learning journey and keep going, and you'll become better and better over time.
Lifelong learning. Find a mentor, and make sure that when you're searching for a mentor, and maybe you strike out the first few times, but definitely keep going. And so, thank you so much for that. Before we exit, I talk a lot on AndrewTempte.com and my Saturday morning news about multidimensionalism. At the top of the show, I indicated that Lee is a fellow musician. If you could just let our listeners know from your vantage point what the importance is to be more than just one thing throughout your career, I think that would help our listeners.
Well, as you know, I'm into music. I play in a rock and roll band. We do 60s music primarily. I also sing in a doo-wop quartet. And for me, those things are so important. The band practice every week. And on every Monday night, I look forward to that as a way to just put a lot of everything else aside, just start thinking about words and notes and how it comes together. And, it's so important. I mean, your focus is about balance. Well, for me, I think you have to have that kind of balance in your personal life. You can get on a treadmill as a professional, and that treadmill can keep going faster and faster, and next thing you know, you're not in a good place. So if you've got something like I have, and I'm very fortunate to have, I'd say grab onto it and keep going with it.
Yeah, thank you for reinforcing that for our listeners. So again, thank you, Lee Rasch, for joining us today and talking about and helping make ethics a bit more of an approachable subject, more practical, and certainly applicable in the world of business. So I'm Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us at andrewtemte.com and go out and check out Leader Ethics Wisconsin. I find it a very interesting concept. I signed up and in my own little way has helping to support the cause and recommend that you do the same. And if you're not from Wisconsin, pick something else that you can support that's going to help bring us back towards center and rational, logical debate, reasoned debate. That's going to really help us move forward. So you can find the podcast on Spotify and on all the other major services. So thank you very much for joining me today.